Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Beyond MD podcast. Today we are diving back into the world of charitable giving. The first half of today's episode will focus on the science and happiness behind giving and how to make the giving process more meaningful and more aligned with our own values. The second half of the episode will touch on the financial aspects of giving, including donation tax credits, tax deductions, strategic donations through the corporation, and also practical aspects of donor-advised funds. To help me unpack all of this, I'm thrilled to invite Jordant Arndt onto the show. Jordan is a certified financial planner based out of Saskatoon. He helps navigate personal finances for Canadian individuals, families, and business owners through investing, planning, and generosity. And before the interview, a quick note from a supporter of the show. This episode is brought to you by Clever Consult. To my fellow medical specialists, you need more than just an AI scribe. Imagine walking into a patient's room where 80% of your clinical note is already completed before you even begin. Canadian gastroenterologist Dr. Kyle Fertinsky found that even with the latest tools, he was still buried in repetitive, low-level tasks. So, he created Clever Consult, the first and only AI platform built exclusively for specialists. Clever Consult has the best-in-class document reviewer built for your specialty. They even have a customizable questionnaire where patient responses can integrate directly into your clinical note. Plus, it comes with the first-ever specialty-trained AI scribe. Clever Consult is 100% Canadian and fully compliant with all privacy standards. Join hundreds of specialists already saving more than 5 hours a week using Clever Consult. To get your 14-day trial started, visit cleverconsult.ai and tell them the Beyond MD podcast sent you. And now on to today's interview. All right, Jordan, I'm really excited to bring you on to Beyond MD today. So first of all, welcome. And I would love to just start off by having our listeners get to know you a little bit. I was doing some digging and I think you have a pretty interesting background. Like we have one thing in common. We both love the game of golf, although I'm fairly certain you're a much better golfer than I am. And then I think you also had a bit of an engineering background. So just tell us about yourself and how all of this led you to financial planning.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first off, Yatin, thanks for having me on here. I've loved following along online with your material and the thoughtful stuff you put out there. So it's a pleasure to have this conversation
likewise. The
today.
feeling is mutual.
Yeah. You're in high school and what do you want to be when you grow up? And who knows, right? And so good at math and science. And so I guess I'll do some engineering and was fortunate that I was able to go down to the States, just outside of Denver, Colorado to play golf while completing my post-secondary education, which was a fantastic experience just to obviously live in a beautiful part of the world, play golf. Someone flew us around the country to play golf. That's not so bad. So that part was fun, but ultimately get a really good education in the process, which was always the ultimate goal there. Did do the engineering thing. Born and raised in Saskatoon. My wife is from here. We met while I was in school. And so anyways, came back kind of quickly after and got married and started that journey and started working as an engineer. And not that it was a bad career whatsoever. And it would have been fantastic if that, kind of the way it went, but just was thinking about what's next after a few years and went and got my Master of Business Administration just to, again, kind of pair that with the engineering degree and see where that goes. And ultimately, it ended up leading to the financial services world. It was one of those things that was always in the back of my head, I guess, from day one. But, the opportunity came up and very fortunate and thankful to have been able to do it. It's I wanted something a bit more relational, I guess, than the engineering world. And this financial world certainly is that. It's a great mix of the technical side of it, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's relationships and trust when talking about money, right? So yeah, it's kind of a unique path, but I guess we're all a product of our experiences as well, right? Where the problem solving mindset, sure, the problems are just different now, but the thought process carries over, right? And the way of approaching something.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're not the first engineer that I've seen pivot to financial planning.
Okay.
But it's interesting now you're basically working on the building blocks of one's financial life and their well-being, which I find interesting. And from following you, Jordan, you seem to have an avid interest in charitable giving. And how did that interest develop for you?
Yeah, alignment of a few reasons, I guess. There's family history, I guess, just in terms of the values that my own family, imparted on me and my brother when we were growing up, and then alignment of personal values today. We'll talk about it here. Giving money away is one way to use money in addition to other ways. And so, yeah, there's just an alignment of, I guess, where we're at personally. We've got young kids at home. And so we're thinking about now, very much thinking about this. I don't have the answers, but how do we teach them to be generous and members of our community and members of society and give back and that sort of thing? We feel my wife and I feel very fortunate, and I say that with complete humility, but I think we're fortunate to live in the country we do and the place that we do and the opportunities that we have. And so when you get involved with charities and you see the amazing work that they're doing on the ground floor with whether it's vulnerable people in our society or education or whatever that may be, it's pretty cool. And so any small part that kind of we can do is fantastic. And so then when it comes to talking to other people about their money, if we can sort of overlap those circles of their own goals, including generosity goals, and just helping people think about that, right? It's, again, it's just a really cool opportunity and responsibility in that sense as well.
I think these are great things to be thinking about. And I can tell you, when I read the book, Raising Money Smart Kids by Robin Taub, that sparked me to think about some of the same questions. How do I talk to my kids about these topics? And in that book, the way I put it together was, well, we can do 5 things with money. We can earn it, we can save it, spend it, invest it, and then we can donate it. And I find that last piece, the donation piece, maybe tends to get a little bit less attention. Certainly early in our careers, we're working hard, we're paying off student debts, and we're focusing a bit more on the accumulation phase. But I think as time goes on, it can be worthwhile to move on to think about that donation phase as well. And I wanted to ask you, Jordan, you have lots of conversations with your clients, but in terms of making the donation piece a bigger focus in our lives and a true part of our financial fabric, how do we go about doing that?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. I think, well, first off, maybe it's fair to just address life is expensive and has gotten more expensive over the last few years. And so I think, generally speaking, there is maybe some of that strain, right, on families and households to some extent. So first off, we need to know that we're okay ourselves, or it's very hard to maybe give money away if we're not sure if we can even make our own goals meet and pay for our kids or meet our own retirement goals. So there is that aspect of it, which obviously if you're working with someone, then they can help with that. Sometimes the donation gene is ingrained, and whether that's a faith background, that might have been just the idea of a tithe or giving some money back, is depending on where the person is coming from, that sometimes is always already there. And so it becomes a part of their budget, whether they're 30 years old or 40 or 50 or 60 or kind of whatever stage. So to me, it kind of depends on where someone is coming from to begin with for that conversation, but then also answering that question of, have we done the work to say, yes, based on the plan and everything that we're executing here, we've taken care of our own objectives. It's not to say that the donation one is secondary, but how does it kind of go alongside that at the same time, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And from speaking to your clients over the years, what are some of the key reasons that people do want to give?
Yeah, by and large, and the research would back this up as well. It's the why behind the giving, the compassion to the cause, personal experience, perhaps, think sick child that had to stay at a Ronald McDonald House or Children's Hospital or something like that. They want to contribute to the community. And so it's very much, they either had a family or friend or directly were impacted themselves. And there is that compassion part of it that really is the driving force on the why. The religious side of it as well, of course, when that comes up. I don't like the word obligation. I hope our generosity isn't an obligation necessarily, but there is a part of that where it's maybe a bit more ingrained in the culture from a religious perspective, right? So it's very much focused on, why does someone give? Well, it's the heart side of it, right? There's that feeling of wanting to give back and to a cause that they're passionate about and care about.
Yeah, and this is a good time to perhaps dive into some of that evidence behind giving. One of the
Yeah,
researchers who I've been following a little bit now is Elizabeth Dunn out of the University of British Columbia. And it seems like she's really made it her life's work to investigate what's the link between giving and subjective well-being. And so some
totally.
of the papers that I'd gone over shed some interesting light on this. It didn't really matter where in the world you were or what income levels were. They looked at different countries, whether it was Canada, Uganda, India, South Africa, but people all over the world experienced subjective well-being when they were either thinking about spending money on somebody other than themselves or going through the act of giving to somebody else. So the science is certainly there. But what I often find, Jordan, is that we can make giving somewhat of an obligation. So let's say we find a charity that we want to give to. What often happens is we'll go to the website and we'll put in our credit card information, we'll hit submit, and then you feel good for a couple of hours, but then that glow doesn't really last. So
Totally.
what I'm interested in picking away at here is the how behind this. How
Hmm.
can we go about making this process a little bit more meaningful and these good feelings last a little bit longer? I would love to hear your perspectives
Totally.
here.
Totally. Yeah. The research that you're referencing, there's some on pro-social spending, they've called
Yeah.
it, or just the idea of if you're given $20, for example, and you spend it all on yourself or you give some of it away, that there's research that actually suggests that there's a longer happiness essentially that's felt from those that actually give the money away. And it's been replicated with kids too, which I find quite interesting. And I was
Yeah.
reflecting on that with my own kids and watching
Mhm.
them and their willingness to share. It's usually a candy or something like that where, they've got a few there and they want to share one with my wife and I or with their siblings. And that's pretty cool to see it start at that young age, and that I think it's in there within us, right? Even though if we're not always necessarily aware of it. I think from the how perspective, to me, it kind of comes down to relationships and where are you already invested or what do you care about. So if we come back to the why,
Mhm.
someone's giving because they have compassion to the cause or they've been personally affected or something like that. We maybe know there's evidence that says if you give money away, you're going to feel some longer happiness benefits about that. But how do we go about that? So
Mhm.
you had shared with me, and I'd seen it before, Elizabeth Dunn had shared a TED talk about
Yeah.
the group of five, it was called. She was just talking about how do I actually go about giving money away and, like you're talking about, actually feeling positive from that. And so what she did is she got involved and sponsored a refugee family that came over with a group of other families. And
Mhm.
that was very much, it wasn't just to check the box and give the money away and feel good about ourselves for a few minutes and file your taxes at the end of the year. They were finding housing and they sponsored and they brought the family over and then were in relationship with them after that fact too. And so I think that was just a fantastic example of really getting involved to where we know where our impact is going, as opposed to fill in your credit card or write a check and call it good. Not that there's not a place for that, but there's a conversation I had with someone last year where they were capacity to give was there, but they just weren't really sure. Well, where do we give to? How do we figure that out? And at the end of the day, they really didn't want to feel like it was just a check cutting exercise to get a tax credit. They wanted to know that their dollars were actually having an impact at the end of the
Yeah.
day, right? So I'm sure we'll unpack that a little bit more here, but I think not being scared to maybe get into it with the charity to some extent, or where do you already where do you volunteer already, what has your family been impacted or your friends been impacted by, where does your heart go to? Is it education? Is it healthcare? Is it kids? Is it world poverty? Whatever sort of the topic is, I think there's opportunities to lean into that and participate.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And in the last few years, my wife had paired up with a few friends to support the entry of a family into the country. And when you're going to the store and you're buying the linen sheets, the towels, and just the kitchenware, when you're actually touching that stuff with your hands, I think that makes you feel a lot more involved. And those feelings of
Totally.
joy can be much longer lasting, like you mentioned. So,
Totally.
Jordan, my understanding is there are around 86,000 registered charities in Canada.
Hmm.
And so for some people, it's like, where do I begin? I'm interested in many
Totally.
things. And I know there are some sites that can help us narrow down charities by sector, by industry. But do you have any guidance on this?
Yeah, it's a good question. And my one thought around it is sometimes I wonder if we overthink this one a little bit to some extent. Often, to be totally honest with you, people come to us and they already know where they want to give, or we're not often helping out with the, I have no idea who I want to give to, but I want to give, and so help me with that process. Often we're looking at ways to structure it either more tax efficiently or incorporate it into their plan or something like that. I do think, though, there are, like you said, there are tools that are out there, and more are going to be coming out all the time, that are going to help measure the impact of various charities and where the dollars are going. One caution I have is often we can focus on how many dollars go to actual impact as opposed to funding the operation of a charity. And there's more and more research that's coming out that suggests don't get too focused on that percentage, because it's easy to say, okay, I want to fund something where if I give $1, I want $1 to end up going to the kids. But the reality is there's people that are working at that charity that also need to live. They need technology to keep up. COVID was a good example of a reset in all that, right? We want businesses to make money, yet we want charities to do it for as bare bones as possible, and just to believe in the mission. And so that's my one caution with that is not that it's not important. We want to make sure that the charity is being good stewards of our dollars, but the executive director should make a livable wage and be compensated accordingly for their efforts. So that's one caution that I have. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I find the most common question that we do ask charities is, if I give you X number of dollars, how much of this is going to go to the cause? But when you think about it and peel back the layers, what if some of the money went into marketing so that they could spread the word and actually attract more? I think we have to think about charities operating like other businesses. They have other needs, other areas where the money could go to. And I was going to ask you, are there any other really relevant questions that we can ask to ensure that, one, we're going to be having an impact with our dollars, but two, also ensure alignment with our values? Any questions at all that we should be asking?
Yeah, I think about a personal experience where there was a new charity that reached out last year to build some relationship, and how do we explore that? And so for me, it's, again, kind of not to use the word relationship too much, but it kind of comes back to that and treat it as, okay, what are you, what is your mission? If I gave you another $1, where is that next dollar going, which helps identify where are some of the pinch points, maybe for a charity. Is it dollars or is it operations? Is it just the executive director has run off their feet and they need to hire someone, and that's where the next dollar is going? What are they working on right now that they're currently facing maybe some challenges with? What's some of that long-term vision as well, though, right? Where just, again, trying to help identify what is the actual impact that we're making with our dollars, as opposed to just cutting a check and getting that tax receipt, right? So I would encourage people not to be scared to ask for a meeting or a phone call or a coffee with, the executive director or someone on the fundraising team, or, depending on how large the organization is, of course. But I think they'd be happy to do so and answer some of those questions just to help someone flesh that out. And it's not to say that the percentage going to admin and operations is not a terrible thing to focus on. It's just, I think sometimes it gets too much focus, if that makes sense.
Fair enough. Let's move on to some of the finances behind giving. And I may butcher this saying, but maybe people would say, don't let the tax tail wag the donation dog. But let's talk about this anyways. I want to understand donation tax credits and deductions, and when these would apply to us personally and through our corporations. Maybe you can just give us a bit of an overview, a 101 on this topic.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. So you're right. I don't think the donation tax credit wags the tail of the why do we give? But I do actually think it influences how much that we give. And that would be true of our experience with clients, that whether they're selling a business or they have a really high income year or another tax problem, sometimes the donation tax credit is one solution for that. So when we think about making a donation, if we make a donation to a registered charity or qualified donee is another word for that. Sometimes those are athletic organizations, educational institutions, but they have to be a registered institution. You will receive a tax receipt, a donation receipt for that donation, less any value that you received. So if you did a golf tournament and the value of the golf round was $100, that would be minused from your donation. Otherwise, you'll get that receipt and then you can file it and include it with your income taxes at the end of the year when you go to file it. Personally, any dollar that we give to a registered charity personally generates a tax credit. And what a tax credit is directly reducing tax dollars that you owe. So if you have $1 in tax credit, you save $1 in tax directly.
Okay.
And so the donation tax credit works like that, where personally you make a donation, you'll probably get anywhere between 43 and 50% tax credit on that, typically depending on province and income and that sort of thing. And so that's the amount of tax that you'd save. In your corporation, if you make a donation, you receive what's called a tax deduction. And the difference with that is that a tax deduction just lowers your taxable income. So if you made $1,000 donation in your corporation, you get to reduce your taxable income in your corporation by that $1,000 and then multiply that by the appropriate tax rate within your corporation. So credits directly reduce taxes owing, deduction directly reduces taxable income, which in turn reduces taxes owing.
Okay, that makes sense. And you mentioned two words there, receipts and corporation. So let's pick away at both of those.
Sure.
Now, my understanding is this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we see GoFundMe campaigns quite a bit, and some of them we do support because it's a cause that's aligned to us. But my understanding is that contributing to a GoFundMe campaign and a nonprofit, that does not result in a donation receipt.
Correct.
Is that correct? Yeah? Okay.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes. It has to be that registered charity, registered with the CRA to be able to issue that receipt.
Okay. And then when it comes to getting that donation receipt, let's say we contribute to a registered charity, we get the receipt. How much of our taxable income can we write off? And then two, how far forward can these receipts be carried in the future?
Yeah. So you can claim up to 75% of your net income in personally for donations that you have made. In the year of death, it actually goes up to 100%. That's a whole other topic that we won't go down, but just think 75% for now. And then also you can carry it forward for 5 years. So sometimes, again, maybe think sale of business or some sort of liquidity event where someone has a bunch of money available, a larger donation will be made, and then those credits will be carried forward for those next few years to use against taxable income in those years.
Okay. And then with regards to corporations, I know in our email conversation, you had mentioned donating shares in kind directly from a corporation to a registered charity. I have touched on this topic before on the podcast, but a reminder is always worthwhile because this can be a tax efficient way to give. Can you give us a quick overview on it?
Sure. Yeah. Often donating is looked at as cash. So think credit card, check, online giving, e-transfer maybe. There's a whole other world, though, of call it planned giving or other ways to give that look at your other assets that you may have that you're able to donate to charity. And one such asset is publicly traded investments, either in your corporation or even personally. It just has to be in a non-registered or an open account. And how that works is if the investment has gone up in value, typically you would owe capital gains tax when you sell that investment.
Yep.
However, we can donate that investment directly to charity, or a portion of it directly to a registered charity. And what that does is it wipes out that capital gains tax. So that part goes to zero. You get the full donation receipt for the amount that you donated, again, then turning into deduction or a credit. And within your corporation, there's sort of a third benefit that happens if you do this. You get an increased credit to the capital dividend account, which allows you to pay out a tax-free dividend to shareholders. Okay. So if we think about our corporation, you eliminated capital gains tax on the investments, you got the donation deduction, as well as you generated capital dividend account credits that you can then flow out to shareholders. So it's, that's very high level, but it's a very, very tax efficient strategy if it's appropriate for someone.
Okay, so let's say we had a $1,000 investment that grew to $10,000, just for argument's sake. And if we transferred those shares in kind to a registered charity, my understanding is that there would be no capital gains tax. The $10,000 value of shares goes to the charity, resulting in a $10,000 tax receipt to the corporation. And then that difference, that capital gain of $9,000, as long as we have the retained earnings in our corporation, that can move to our personal hands, that amount of $9,000 tax-free. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep, okay. Exactly. So in that instance, typically 50% of that capital gain would be taxable. So $4,500 in this example.
Okay.
Instead, that goes to zero. And as a result, then, like you mentioned, the ability to pay out that tax-free dividend to shareholders also went up to $9,000. So it's super, super powerful. And you still got the $10,000 donation receipt as well in the process that you can offset other taxes with accordingly.
Okay, amazing. And Jordan, let's talk a little bit now about donor-advised funds. This is a topic over the years that's been getting a bit more attention. How I view it, I think for people who are interested in being more charitable, but want to take some time to learn about charities and make sure that their giving is aligned with their values, I see donor-advised funds as a good avenue to pursue this strategy. But maybe give us a 101 overview on donor advised funds, what this involves, and maybe even a little bit on the setup of this.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, donor advised funds are certainly gaining in popularity and the conversation. They've been around for a long time, actually. It's just starting to, or we're hearing about it more and more anyways. You can think of a donor advised fund simply as your own personal charitable account. So it's like a private foundation. However, you don't have to go through any of the hassle and ongoing hassle of setting one up. So a donor advised fund is simply a registered charity that you would set up an account with. So Yatin, you could have one, I could have one, 1,000 other people could have one with this registered charity, and we don't have our little slice of the pie. That's my donated dollars into this, which then I get to control and direct and make grants out to registered charities at the end of the day. So you set up the account, you fund the account, whether that's through cash or investments or some other means. You get a donation tax receipt back for that contribution from the registered charity. The money is now in the donor advised fund or at the registered charity, and that can either sit in their investment pool, it can sit in cash, maybe you can bring in an independent advisor as well in the process. But then over time, you grant out to charity from there. So let's just use some numbers. If you put $1,000 into your donor advised fund, it could sit there then for some period of time, and you could then make 10 grants of $100 from there over the next year or 2 or 5 years, to be honest, up to you on that front. So it achieves a couple purposes. It separates the donation receipt from the actual end charity getting the money. So that is one method, but quite simply, you can just think of it like your own personal charitable account that you can control and give directions over.
Okay, so let's say we put $1,000 into that donor advised fund. Then we can allocate money to different types of charities, not just the one that the fund is set up with.
Correct. Yeah. So the fund would be set up with a registered charity, but they in and of themselves wouldn't be doing call it the boots on the ground charitable work. So donor advised fund, you make the contribution of $1,000. Since they're a registered charity, that's how you get the receipt. But then maybe you want to give it to the Children's Hospital and Ronald McDonald House and your local church and the food bank or whatever else. That's where then you would make those grant recommendations after the money is in there.
Okay. And then who's doing the investing for the money in the fund? Is it the charity? Could it be us? Could it be somebody else that we choose?
Yeah, bad answer. It depends. There are many different donor advised funds in Canada with various minimums and options around investments, fees, requirements around disbursements. So how much actually goes to end charity or how much you need to do every year. And so that's the it depends part where yes, sometimes or often there'll be an independent advisor that may get involved. So whoever your normal financial advisor is may be able to set one of these up. You're not going to do that on $1,000 donation, though. There would have to be some minimum amount of donation to make that process worthwhile to say, okay, let's invest some of this for a longer term to try and seek some growth. But investing in it is absolutely a possibility where you put in, let's just say $50,000 and you don't want to necessarily give it all away immediately. There is the opportunity for that amount to grow and you end up giving away more to charity over time as a result.
Okay. But then you would get the receipt based on the donation made today?
Exactly. Yep, exactly. So to give you an example, one that I set up a few years ago had a business owner that was needing a tax receipt at the end of the year. It was about December 15th. It was late in the year, but he had a tax problem in that calendar year. And so he needed the donation receipt at that time, but ultimately didn't know where he wanted to give the money to at the end of the day in that moment. And so made the donation into the donor advised fund, got the receipt back, solved his tax problem in that year. And then we've since started to disperse the money and will continue to disperse the money over the last couple of years and will continue for the next few years as well. And as a result, he's probably ended up being able to give away 20 or 30% more so far, just based on the way that investments have gone over the last couple of years and the last few years here. So that part is really nice, but his problem was that tax problem at that time, and the donor advised fund was a really good solution to be able to issue that receipt and then give him time to think about, okay, who do I actually want to give this money to from here?
Okay. 2 last questions on donor advised funds. Are there any fees associated with them?
Yes, for sure. There'll be some sort of administration fee for the fund. If you are bringing in an advisor, there'll probably be some sort of advisor fee, maybe some investment fees and that sort of thing. But yes, they're typically it would be a percentage of dollars that you have in the fund, as well as maybe some transaction costs. So, X amount of dollars to process a donation of securities or something like that.
Okay. And are there any cons of donor advised funds that we should be aware about?
Yeah. So I think there's a fear that the money actually won't go to charity. So you make the donation, you get the tax receipt because maybe you have the tax problem or whatever other reason, but then the money sits in the donor advised fund and doesn't actually end up funding charitable intent. There's more and more research coming out that says that's actually not true, and that actually once someone incorporates the donor advised fund into their family's financial structure and their giving structure, that it actually amplifies generosity. It doesn't take it away. So, but there is that risk, I suppose, of the money being donated and then ultimately ends up sitting there for maybe longer than it should. And then because of the many options, it's just trying to find a donor advised fund platform that aligns well with your intentions. So the community foundations are an example of donor advised funds. There's independent third-party options. And so sometimes there is limited granting flexibility. And then one other thing I'd mention is technically you give up legal control of those funds once you donate them to the charity. You as a donor may grant recommendations for how the money should be dispersed. Technically, the donor advised fund wouldn't have to follow those directions. I am personally not aware of any instances where that hasn't been true. I think it would be kind of donor advised fund suicide if they were to do that to some extent. But that is part of it, if that makes sense.
Okay, good to know. And for people who are looking to find a donor advised fund platform that aligns with what they're looking for, where do we start looking?
Yeah, good question. If you do work with a professional advisor, that would possibly be a good place to start. Perhaps they've used one before or familiar with the landscape. The community foundations are in all the major centers across the country, they are donor advised funds platforms which often have direct impact back into the community. So that can be a good place to start. But those would kind of be my couple suggestions where hopefully your professional advisor has experience with it and can speak into it. If not, there's certainly other professional advisors that can. But you do need someone that has probably some familiarity with the structure, right, to help discern which one is the appropriate fit.
Okay, Jordan, those are all my questions for today, but I want to give you a moment if you have any closing thoughts that you wanted to share on the material we discussed today or anything at all.
Yeah, well, I just appreciate you bringing light to this subject, Yatin. It's the generosity conversation is fantastic, and we can get into the weeds of the technicalities of donations and taxes and all that sort of thing. But I think at the end of the day, if we kind of come back to where we started, your story influences where you and your family are passionate about, and the difference and impact you want to make in Canada and the world, and I think that's really cool. And so just more awareness sort of around the subject, I think is awesome as we think about the needs in our society and the vulnerable that are there, right? And how we can all make a difference. So yeah, thank you for building this. And yeah, if whoever's listening, if you explore that with your family and those that you trust, and ultimately, hopefully we can contribute to a better world for the future than we have today.
That's really well said, Jordan. And I really appreciate how focused you are on this subject too. It's nice that you've made this a focus for yourself as well. So thank you again for joining me and giving us your time, Jordan. It's been a pleasure to connect with you.
Yeah, you as well. Thanks so much, Yatin, for having me. This has been fantastic.
All right, and thank you to everyone listening for taking the time out of your day to join Jordan and I on this conversation about charitable giving. All relevant links, papers, and contact information will be in the show notes of today's episode. And to everyone, if you are looking to get a little bit more information on topics that bridge both personal and financial wellness, you can feel free to check out the Beyond MD newsletter by going to beyondmd.ca, hitting the newsletter tab, and you can enter your email address. Until next time, stay well, stay savvy.